Hi everyone, today our group is going to present you an infrastic poem, Word Photograph. But before we show you the poem, let's look at some photos first. Let's think. What is your first impression of these photographs, and what do you think happened? Let's keep your answers in mind and see what the poem tells you about it.
Word Photograph by Kate Daniels. A naked child is running along the path toward us. Her arms stretched out, her mouth open, the world turned to trash behind her. She is running from the smoke and the soldiers, from the body of her mother and little sister thrown down into a ditch, from the blown up bamboo hut, from the melted pots and pans. And she's also running from the gods who have changed the sky to fire and puddled the earth with skin and blood. She's running, my God, to us, 10,000 miles away, reading the caption beneath her picture in a weekly magazine. All over the country, we are feeling sorry for her and being appalled at the war being fought in the other world. She keeps on running, after the shutter of the camera clicks. She's running to us. For how can she know her feet beating a path on another continent? How can she know what we really are? From the distance, we look so terribly human.
Before we go into the details, let's look at some background information first. Vietnam War. Vietnam War was started in 1955 and ends in 1975 with the unified of the Soviet Union. Vietnam War was started as anti-colonial war at first, which against French colonists, but later it turned into a proxy war in Cold War, which is communist back north against a free market democracy south. The first American president to assist South Vietnam was Eisenhower. Since President Kennedy began to support operations in Vietnam, President Johnson committed thousands of U.S. troops to the war. In the later period of President Nixon's administration, he ordered to withdraw the troops in Vietnam. There were more than 3 million people, including over 58,000 Americans, were killed in the Vietnam War, and more than half of the deaths was innocent Vietnamese civilians. Nick Ute is author of the war photography we have seen before in the presentation. He is a Vietnamese American photographer and joined Associated Press in 1969 in Vietnam after his old brother, also a photographer and also joined Associated Press and was killed in Vietnam. During his time in Vietnam, he was wounded 3 times. The picture, The Terror of War, which we've seen at the beginning of our presentation, was taken in 1972. He saved the little girl in the picture, and he is still keeping touch with the little girl Kim till today. Because of this picture, he won almost all the major awards, such as World Press Photographer of the Year, Pulitzer Prize, World Press Photo Award for Sport News.
Kate Daniels is the author of the poem Word Photograph. She was born in Richmond, Virginia, and she earned Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts in English Literature at the University of Virginia and Master of Fine Arts in Columbia University. Daniels' poetry consistently explores aspects of gender, racism, trauma, and Southern culture. She also explores addiction as a family illness. Her ekphrastic poem, Word Photograph, describes the devastations of the Vietnam War from a perspective of a bystander in America observing them from thousands of miles away.
And as for the potential audiences of the poem, there will be 2 groups of people. The first will be the politicians. It involves the countries that are experiencing war, and also the other political forces that are involved in some of the battlefields. And also there will be the United Nations, which is an organization internationally that aims to enforce peace. And for the ordinary people group, there will be the population that are suffering or suffered from the war, including the civilians and the soldiers, and also for those who lives in peace area and time, which is considered as the bystander of the war.
After knowing the basic background information about the photographer and the poet, I will talk about the first argument for the major project. In the aphoristic poem, K. Daniels employs various rhetorical devices, such as diction and imagery, to depict the horrors of the war on the physical and the mental health of the girl in the picture. Now I will analyze the first section of the poem from two directions, the imagery and the diction. The first quote about imagery is "the world turned to trash" behind her. This is a description of the surrounding in the photo taken by Nick, as the background is wrecked by the explosive bombs. The word trash is not a typical word used to describe landscape. As a result, the sentence creates a strong image of a ruined town ravaged by the weapons. In an interview with Kim, the girl in the picture, she recounts that as South Vietnamese planes were bombing the village of Nam Pong, one of them hit her in the back and knocked her down. Therefore, she had to rip her clothes off but keep running for refuge, having no time to think about her burns. Eventually, she experienced 3rd and 4th degree burns over various her body parts, such as the shoulders, the arms, the neck, and the back, as reported in a medical article published on the JAMA Dermatology. The physical pain Kim had suffered from was severe, since she rated the agony of her pain as 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. So this imagery generated from the quote appeals to pathos by evoking audience's concern and apprehension. The second quote I will talk about is, "She's running from the bodies of her mother and little sister thrown down into a ditch." This is another strong imagery that her family are found dead and eventually ended up in a ditch due to an explosion of their house. The sentence explicitly indicates that as the bombs decimated her home and family, the girl was probably the only survivor from the bombs, and she has to keep running in order to escape. K. Daniels not only employs imagery but also diction to demonstrate the negative effect of war on civilians. The quote I focus on is this one, "And she is also running from the gods, who have changed the sky to fire and puddled the earth with skin and blood." So here the gods are not capitalized but are in lower cases. I interpret it in two ways. The first interpretation is that the God can be viewed as the absolute power of people, specifically those who conduct a war that can easily change and take away hundreds and thousands of people's lives. The God can also be interpreted in a different way as the girl's own belief of God and her salvation. Over her course of life, Kim endured immeasurable pain that even 45 years later, she still had to take treatment for her burns from the bombs. Besides the physical suffering, she was also subject to mental discomfort. In her interview, she recounted the hatred and resentment toward the war, as well as those who caused her torment. She felt desperate and constantly asked herself, "Why me?" However, she said in her bibliography, "Those bombs lead me to Jesus Christ." On Christmas Eve in Vietnam, as she participated in a worship ritual, faith inspired and transformed her, leading her to the peace and salvation from Jesus Christ. Instead of cursing and resenting her enemies, she learned to embrace and to forgive them. The photo shown on this slide aims to send a message of love, hope, and forgiveness. Kim knows that she should have died in the Vietnam War, but she began to realize that her life was saved from another reason. Kim learned that there was value in suffering. Here is another quote related to the word God. "She is running to us, my God, to us." 10,000 miles away, reading the caption beneath her picture in a weekly magazine. And here's our second discussion question. What is your interpretation of the phrase, "my God"?
Besides, Kate Daniels also employs irony, rhetorical choices, and repetitions to introduce her idea of humanity in the poem. The author uses rhetorical questions in her poem. Let's look at these lines. Her feet beating a path on another continent, what we really are. The author uses rhetorical questions to make the audience thinking while they're reading the poem. You may have the following questions while reading. Would Kim have a better life when she goes to another continent? If she could get used to the completely different culture and completely different lifestyle? What we really are, bystanders, innocent people, or enemies? Kate drags people's attention to the war and let the audience thinking about their roles in the war while reading the poem. He uses rhetorical questions which persuade the audience to anti-war. Kate repeats a question, how can she know, in the poem, which expresses her worry and doubtness. What Kim is going to face is a really dirty and filthy world, and Kate is worried that if Kim could have a better life. Kate enhances the audience to reflect the darkness of our world and thinking about human roles. It is really human who created all of it. Last but not the least, let's look at this line. From the distance, we look so terribly human. The readers are all human, but Kate was suggesting that we are not human. It is such an irony that we look so terribly human. We look so terribly human is because so many people lost their home, family. Politicians do not care about their citizens, they only care about their benefits. People do not have empathy. It is such an irony that Vietnam War started as an anti-colonist war and fought for liberty at the beginning. But it turned into a proxy war between the United States and the Soviet Union. People should have their rights, the rights of life, liberty, and property which government could not take away. However, during the war, U.S. citizens do not have their rights to decide if they should go to the war. Soldiers do not have the rights to decide if they should fight the war. People in Vietnam do not have the rights to decide their lives. Kate uses the irony to emphasize war are unethical and we should object to war.
Besides her reflection in her poem, Kate Daniel is also connecting into a broader view of the Vietnam War to bring her message of humanity. In order to convey her idea, Kate Daniel leaves enough room for the audience to reflect on humanity. Specifically, this topic can be discussed by two views from the bystanders of war, from the politician and from the ordinary people. She does this by demonstrating the brutality of war and emphasizing the distance of the audience to war. As what our group have already analyzed previously of the brutality of war according to the poem, Kate Daniel is implicitly appealing to a sense of sorrow and empathy that enhances the audience to reflect on how cruel and inhuman a group of people can be to others. And here are some other examples of the immoral events happened truly during the Vietnam War. This is a documented report from the Vietnam War of what had the military done during the war, and it is reporting that they were randomly attacking and burning down villages, regardless of if there was any enemy or not, and then recorded this action as a success of destroying an enemy's camp. Also, they set up a free fire zone where anyone would be shooted regardless of their identity immediately when they stepped on this land. And mostly they were just innocent civilians who suffered from the unrestrained bombing slaughters. More incredibly, the military even asked the soldier to increase their body count to achieve the measure of success of a unit with a method like collecting stamps in the coffee shop in order for a prize. They rewarded those who killed a lot and punished those who slacked on killing people. And most of the bodies in their counting were just from the innocent civilians. it is not just a war. It is a carnival of mankind's savage and inhumanity. Although Kate Daniel is only showing a sole event that reveals the brutality of war in her poem, she links this topic to the broader background and history of the Vietnam War, which then effectively enhances the audience to be more likely to evoke the common human value of ethic, morality, and humanity. These slaughters and atrocities of one group of people to another reveals the ultimate inhumanity of war, which provides a room for the audience to reflect on this topic by themselves. So what is the necessity and point to start and conduct a war? Why would people torture and kill each other so brutally? And is there really any understandable and acceptable reason for these inhuman actions? Besides that, we can also think of another aspect of humanity in war in addition to the political side. In her poem, Kate Daniel emphasizes the distance between the war that was fought in the other world and we, the audience as well as the bystander of the war. The other world here in the line not only means by another country, but more like a world that we can't imagine, a world that is completely different from where we live now. And by pointing out this distance between us, Kate Daniel is provoking a sense of sorry and empathy of the audience, and more importantly, making the audience to reflect on the humanity inside us. Think about this comparison. We are like the two people in the right photo, solely watching the news and hearing the story, versus somebody like Nick, shooting photos that reveals the world to the public as well as saving the girl Kim in a battlefield from burning to death. This makes me ask myself, is this really humanity for us to just simply feeling sorry for them? Is helping them like Nick counted as the true humanity? Or what is the standard for being human? And should we all be human to others? Additionally, by repeating the phrase running to us in her poem, Kate Daniel is trying to appeal a sense of responsibility and empathy of the audience. By comparing us, who are exposed to the war simply as just watching a weekly magazine and TV news, and those who are actually experiencing it, she is also asking a question to the audience. If there is a chance to actually help them, whether in person or from a distance, will you do it? As one of the audience of her poem, I think a lot and I reflect a lot on war and humanity. This is not only an effect or message from the poem, but also a serious topic for us to think about. And by saying so, Kate Daniel has really prompted reflection from the audience effectively with her poem.
As Linda and Lorraine have just illustrated, there is no doubt that the photograph and the poem have strongly condemned the cruelty of the war and brought us with an issue of humanity. But simultaneously, Kim's experience has actually motivated lots of people to protect victims and cherish peace. So people's response toward the war actually tends to have a positive effect. While the publication of the famous photo and Kim's stories have enabled millions of people to realize the significance of both the horror of the war and of world peace, Kim dedicated her whole life to the promotion of peace and healing, and other people also have reached out to traumatized children as well. The first example would be the Kim Foundation International. The concept of the foundation was inspired by Kim's experience. She suffered many years from painful burn therapy, but she always longed to reach out and help other children who were victimized by war. And the foundation may have been inspired by her pain, but its focus is on world peace and healing. Specifically, the foundation is aimed to provide basic education for disadvantaged children in Uganda, and it also supports children by providing necessary medical and psychological supports in order that they will overcome their traumatic experiences. Because of Kim's courage and generosity in promoting a culture of peace through reconciliation and tolerance, after a long and tough stage of salvation and forgiving, Kim accepted Jesus as her savior. And she now travels and speaks to groups, spreading her spirit and personal reconciliation with God. and Kim was designated as UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Culture of Peace in November 1997. Just as Kim once has told her friends and relatives, "I never thought that the child who was a famous symbol of war would one day be invited to become a symbol of peace." After the war, so many foundations and facilities were constructed, aiming to save more traumatized people. And Kim's painful childhood experience is just the start of a spiritual and a healing journey. Her incredible strength and spirit are evident when she speaks about forgiveness and helping children. The fire was burning on Kim's back, and it still is, but now her heart is also on fire with warm and bright kindness and forgiveness. Forgiveness was born after the war, and it has been passed on in peaceful days. Kim became the honorable symbol and ambassador of peace and healing, while there are people who set up foundations to help more children. And if there is no such effort, those children would be still living in extreme agony and trauma. All of the efforts have not only healed people's physical and psychological bruises, but also, more importantly, they're spreading morality, virtue, and a spirit to every corner on earth, which is to forgive and be faithful. The war has changed Kim's life. It is exactly her painful memories that motivated her to help other young victims, and it is exactly the pain and horrors that motivate people to build shelters for victims. But all humans should still prevent the war from happening again and help future generations get away from the pains which they should not experience at all. And here comes to our third discussion question. As probably most of you have seen this photograph before, how has this poem and/or our group's presentation changed your understanding and thoughts of it? And the next 2 slides will be our works cited pages. And this is all for our presentation. Thank you for listening.